The silence that followed Malachi's action lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Guests who had been laughing and raising their glasses now stood frozen, watching as Silas Ward pushed through the crowd with the urgency of a man trying to stop a disaster. Boone Carter was still holding Clara's hand when he noticed the commotion near the portrait wall. His wedding day had been perfect. The ceremony at sunset, the feast that lasted hours, the dancing that brought together neighbors from 3 counties. But now something was wrong. He could see it in the way his father-in-law Silas moved, in the way Violet Brooks had stepped back from her own husband as if he carried some kind of disease. "Malachi, put that back!" Silas's voice cut through the room like a blade. But Malachi didn't move. He held the birth certificate in one hand and kept the other on the turned portrait frame, as if protecting what he'd revealed. The paper trembled in Malachi's grip, and when he spoke, his words came out hoarse and broken. 30 years, Silas. 30 years you let us believe William Carter died in that ranch accident. But William Carter never existed, did he? Clara felt Boone's hand tighten around hers. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room like storm clouds gathering. The name William Carter was carved into the family gravestone outside. Boone's grandfather, the man who supposedly built the ranch, the foundation of everything the Carter family claimed to be. Violet Brooks finally found her voice. "Malachi, what are you talking about? What does that paper say?" But Silas had reached the portrait wall now, and his face carried the pale desperation of a man whose deepest secret was about to destroy everything he'd built. He reached for the birth certificate, but Malachi pulled it away. "This isn't William Carter's birth certificate," Malachi announced to the room. "The man in this portrait, the man we've been calling grandfather, his real name was William Hawthorne. And according to this document, he wasn't a rancher at all." The room erupted in confused whispers, but Silas raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried 30 years of buried truth. "Malachi, you don't understand what you're doing. Some secrets exist to protect people." "Protect people from what?" Boone stepped forward, still holding Clara's hand, but no longer feeling like a groom celebrating his wedding. "What was my grandfather protecting us from?" But before Silas could answer, Malachi unfolded the birth certificate completely and read the occupation written in faded ink. The words that came out of his mouth would change everything they thought they knew about the Carter family legacy. The word that Malachi spoke hit the room like a physical blow. Outlaw. Boone felt the floor shift beneath him. His grandfather, William Carter, the man whose name was carved into every deed, every contract, every piece of legal documentation that made the Carter Ranch legitimate, had been an outlaw named William Hawthorne. The family legacy that 3 generations had built their lives around was founded on a lie. Clara watched her new husband's face drain of color. She'd married into what she thought was one of the most respected families in the territory, people whose word carried weight because of their reputation for honesty and hard work. Now she was learning that everything started with deception. "That's impossible," Violet whispered, moving closer to look at the birth certificate her husband held. "Our family has owned this land legally for 30 years. There are documents, property records, bank accounts, all under a false name," Malachi interrupted. "William Hawthorne was wanted in 3 counties for cattle theft and bank robbery. When he came here, he changed his name to William Carter and used stolen money to buy this land." Silas Ward finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of decades. "Malachi, you have no idea what you're unleashing. William came here to start over. He put his outlaw days behind him, worked this land honestly, built something good. Built something good on blood money," Malachi shot back. "Do you know how many families lost their savings when he robbed those banks? How many ranchers went under when he stole their cattle?" The guests who remained in the room stood transfixed by the argument. Some began moving toward the door, sensing that they were witnessing the destruction of one of the territory's most prominent families. Others stayed, drawn by the same horrible fascination that makes people unable to look away from a disaster. Boone released Clara's hand and stepped toward Malachi. "How long have you known this? How long have you been sitting at our dinner table, celebrating our family occasions, knowing that everything we believed about ourselves was a lie?" Malachi's eyes filled with something that looked like relief mixed with anguish. "I found this certificate 3 months ago when I was helping Violet clean out her mother's belongings. Sarah Ward kept it hidden for 30 years, along with something else." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second document, this one yellowed with age and bearing an official seal. The paper shook in his hands as he held it up for everyone to see. "A federal warrant," he announced. William Hawthorne wasn't just any outlaw. He was wanted for murder. The room went completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing, sensing that something far more serious than family drama was unfolding. Silas Ward looked like a man watching his life's work crumble before his eyes. But then Clara noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the room, near the entrance, stood a man she didn't recognize. He wore a badge on his chest and had been listening to every word Malachi spoke. And judging by the expression on his face, he was very interested in what he'd just learned about William Hawthorne's true identity. The man with the badge stepped forward, and the sound of his boots on the wooden floor seemed to echo through the silent room. Deputy Marshal Thomas Kane had been invited to the wedding as a courtesy. The Carter family's reputation for community service had earned them respect from local law enforcement. Now he found himself in the middle of what might be the most significant criminal discovery of his career. "Mr. Brooks," Deputy Kane spoke calmly, but his hand rested near his weapon. "I'm going to need to see those documents." Malachi looked around the room, suddenly realizing that his moment of truth-telling had turned into something much more dangerous. Silas Ward was staring at him with the expression of a man who had just watched his family's destruction unfold in real time. Boone stepped between the deputy and his brother-in-law. "Marshal Kane, with respect, this is my wedding celebration. Whatever family matters we're discussing can be handled privately. Not when those matters involve federal crimes," Kane interrupted. "If William Hawthorne is indeed the same man wanted for murder 30 years ago, then we have a legal situation that extends far beyond family privacy." Clara felt her new husband's entire body tense beside her. The celebration that had begun with such joy was now threatening to end with arrests, legal investigations, and the complete destruction of the Carter name. She thought about her own family, about what they would say when they learned she'd married into a legacy built on criminality. Violet Brooks moved closer to her husband, finally understanding the full weight of what he'd been carrying. "Malachi, why didn't you tell me? Why did you wait until tonight?" "Because I hoped I was wrong," Malachi replied, his voice breaking. "I spent 3 months researching, trying to prove that William Hawthorne and William Carter were different people. But every piece of evidence led back to the same conclusion." Deputy Kane extended his hand toward the documents. "The warrant for William Hawthorne is still active. There's no statute of limitations on murder. If this ranch was purchased with stolen money, if the Carter family has been living on the proceeds of federal crimes, the Carter family had nothing to do with William Hawthorne's crimes." Silas Ward finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had kept secrets for 30 years. "William changed his name when he came here because he wanted to start over. But he earned every acre of this land through honest work. That's not entirely true, is it, Silas?" Malachi's question cut through the room like a blade. "Because there's something else you haven't told them. Something about how William Hawthorne really died." The room went completely still. Even Deputy Kane seemed to hold his breath, sensing that another revelation was coming. Malachi reached into his jacket and pulled out a third document, this one bearing the official seal of the territorial government. When he spoke, his words carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "William Hawthorne didn't die in a ranch accident 30 years ago. According to this death certificate, he was killed by federal marshals during an attempted arrest, which means the man we buried in the Carter family plot isn't William Carter at all." Deputy Kane stepped forward and took the death certificate from Malachi's trembling hands. His eyes scanned the document quickly, but when he looked up, his expression had changed from professional interest to complete bewilderment. "This says William Hawthorne was killed in a shootout with federal marshals near Silver Creek, approximately 50 miles from here," Kane read aloud. "But if that's true, then who is the man buried in our family cemetery?" Boone finished the question, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is the man we've been calling grandfather for 30 years? Silas Ward looked around the room at the faces staring at him, all demanding answers to questions he'd hoped would never be asked. The weight of 3 decades of carefully guarded secrets was finally crushing down on him, and there was no escape. "His name was Marcus Webb," Silas said finally. "He was William Hawthorne's partner." The admission hit the room like an explosion. Clara actually took a step backward, pulling her hand away from Boone's as the full scope of the deception became clear. Not only had their family patriarch been an outlaw, but he wasn't even who they thought he was. Violet Brooks sank into a nearby chair, her face pale as paper. "You mean our entire family history is about a stranger? Someone we never even knew?" "Marcus Webb was dying when he came here," Silas continued. his voice heavy with exhaustion. He'd been shot during the same raid where William Hawthorne died. He stumbled onto this land barely alive, carrying Hawthorne's identification papers and what was left of the stolen money. Deputy Kane was writing notes rapidly. So Marcus Webb assumed William Hawthorne's identity to avoid prosecution for his own crimes? Marcus Webb assumed William Hawthorne's identity because he wanted to do something good before he died, Silas corrected. He used the money to buy this land legally, established the ranch, and worked it honestly for the few years he had left. When he died, we buried him as William Carter because that's who he'd become. Malachi shook his head in disbelief. But why keep the secret? Why not tell the truth after he died? Because by then, the ranch was successful. The Carter name meant something in this territory, and because there were other people involved, people who deserved protection. The way Silas said those last words made everyone in the room turn to look at him with new attention. There was something else, something bigger than just a dying outlaw trying to make amends. Boone stepped toward his father-in-law, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. What other people, Silas? What aren't you telling us? Silas Ward looked around the room one more time, his eyes settling on Deputy Kane. When he spoke, his words would reveal the final piece of a puzzle that had been 30 years in the making. Marcus Webb didn't come here alone, Silas said quietly. He brought someone with him, someone who was just a child then, but who grew up to become one of the most respected members of our community. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, slowly, every person in the room began to understand what Silas was really saying. The child that Marcus Webb had brought with him 30 years ago was still alive, still part of their community, still living under a name that wasn't really theirs. Deputy Kane's hand moved to his weapon as he realized that he wasn't just investigating a 30-year-old crime. He was looking at someone who might be the last living connection to the Hawthorne-Webb criminal enterprise. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 10 a.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. The room fell into a silence so complete that even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. Every guest looked around at the others, wondering who among them might be living under a stolen identity. Deputy Kane's eyes moved from face to face, his hand still resting on his weapon. Boone felt his world continuing to crumble with each revelation. Silas, just tell us who it is. End this nightmare. But before Silas could respond, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. He's talking about me. Everyone turned to see Dr. Samuel Reed step forward, the town's most respected physician, the man who had delivered half the babies in the territory and saved countless lives during fever outbreaks, walked slowly toward the center of the room. Clara gasped. Dr. Reed had been the one to pronounce them husband and wife when the minister fell ill just before the ceremony. He'd been part of their family's most important moments for as long as anyone could remember. My name isn't Samuel Reed, the doctor continued, his voice steady but filled with 30 years of carefully controlled emotion. When Marcus Webb brought me here, I was 8 years old, and my name was Tommy Hawthorne. William Hawthorne was my father. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Deputy Kane immediately stepped toward Dr. Reed, but the physician held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I've been waiting for this day for 30 years, Dr. Reed said, waiting for someone to discover the truth and end the lie I've been living. Violet Brooks looked like she might faint. But you've saved so many lives. You delivered my children. You've been nothing but good to this community. Because Marcus Webb taught me that the sins of the father don't have to become the sins of the son, Dr. Reed replied. When my father and his partner robbed those banks, when they killed that guard in Silver Creek, I was just a child. Marcus saved me from that life. Deputy Kane had his notepad out, writing rapidly. Thomas Hawthorne. There was a warrant issued for a child who disappeared after the Silver Creek incident. Authorities assumed he'd been killed along with his father. Marcus Webb made sure everyone believed that, Silas Ward said quietly. He changed the boy's name, gave him a new identity, raised him as his own grandson. When Marcus died, Samuel was 16 and already showing a gift for healing. We sent him east to study medicine, and when he came back, he became the doctor this territory needed. Boone stared at the man who had been like a second father to him. All these years, you knew about the stolen money, about the murders, about everything. Dr. Reed nodded slowly. I knew that my father's crimes had funded the purchase of your family's ranch. I knew that every dollar Marcus Webb spent to build this community came from blood money, and I've spent every day of my adult life trying to make amends for crimes I was too young to prevent. The weight of the doctor's confession settled over the room like a shroud, but Deputy Kane wasn't finished with his questions. Dr. Reed, the statute of limitations may have run out on most of your father's crimes, but the murder charge is still active, and if you knowingly benefited from the proceeds of those crimes, then arrest me, Dr. Reed interrupted. I'm tired of running from a past I never chose. If paying for my father's sins means losing everything I've built, then that's the price I'll pay. But as Deputy Kane reached for his handcuffs, Malachi Brooks spoke up one final time. Wait, there's something else you all need to know. Something that changes everything about who's really responsible for this mess. Malachi Brooks reached into his jacket one more time and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Its pages yellowed with age. The sight of it made Silas Ward go completely pale, as if he were seeing a ghost. This belonged to Marcus Webb, Malachi announced. I found it hidden with the other documents in Sarah Ward's belongings. It contains 30 years of entries, including a detailed confession about what really happened in Silver Creek. Deputy Kane lowered his handcuffs and stepped toward Malachi. What kind of confession? The kind that proves William Hawthorne and Marcus Webb weren't the criminals everyone thinks they were, Malachi replied, opening the journal to a page marked with a strip of leather. According to this, they were hired by the bank owner himself to steal his own money. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Dr. Reed, who had been prepared to surrender to 30 years of guilt, looked up with an expression of complete bewilderment. That's impossible, Deputy Kane said. Why would a bank owner hire someone to rob his own institution? Malachi began reading from the journal. Marcus writes here that Jeremiah Blackwood, owner of Silver Creek Bank, was facing bankruptcy. His bank was about to be investigated for fraud, and he needed the money to disappear before federal auditors arrived. He hired Hawthorne and Webb to stage a robbery that would cover his tracks. Silas Ward suddenly looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Malachi, you need to stop reading from that journal. Why? Boone demanded. Because it proves that my grandfather wasn't a murderer? Because it proves that Dr. Reed has been carrying guilt for a crime his father didn't commit? Malachi continued reading. But the plan went wrong. Blackwood got greedy and decided he didn't want to share the money with Hawthorne and Webb. He set them up, tipped off the federal marshals about the robbery, and made sure they would be killed during the arrest. Dr. Reed sat down heavily in a nearby chair. My father was murdered? He wasn't a killer? He was the victim? According to Marcus Webb's journal, your father was trying to return the money when the marshals found them, Malachi confirmed. The guard who died in the bank was killed by Blackwood himself, who then blamed it on the robbery. Deputy Kane was writing furiously in his notepad. If this is true, then we're not looking at a 30-year-old robbery case. We're looking at murder and conspiracy. Who was this Jeremiah Blackwood? Where is he now? The silence that followed Deputy Kane's question was deafening. Silas Ward looked around the room like a trapped animal, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Jeremiah Blackwood changed his name when he came to this territory, Silas said. He used the money he stole from his own bank to buy land, establish a business, and become one of the most respected members of the community. Boone felt his blood turn to ice as understanding dawned on him. Silas, what was Jeremiah Blackwood's new name? Silas Ward looked directly at his son-in-law, and when he answered, the words came out like a death sentence. Silas Ward. Jeremiah Blackwood became Silas Ward, which means the man who murdered Dr. Reed's father, the man who destroyed William Hawthorne and Marcus Webb, the man who has been living off blood money for 30 years. Silas paused, his voice breaking. Is me. The confession hit the room like an earthquake. Deputy Kane reached for his weapon, but Silas held up his hands in surrender. The real criminal, the man responsible for 30 years of lies and stolen lives, had finally been exposed, and he had been sitting at their dinner table, attending their celebrations and calling himself family the entire time. The silence that followed Silas Ward's confession lasted only seconds before the room exploded into chaos. Guests who had remained to witness the family drama now realized they were in the presence of a confessed murderer. Some rushed toward the exits, others stood frozen in shock, and a few moved protectively toward Dr. Reed, as if trying to shield him from 30 years of undeserved guilt. Deputy Kane drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Silas. Jeremiah Blackwood, You're under arrest for the murders of William Hawthorne, Marcus Webb, and the bank guard in Silver Creek. You have the right to remain silent." But Silas wasn't finished confessing. The weight of 30 years of lies seemed to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. "I killed them all," he said, his voice hollow and broken. "I killed the guard to make the robbery look real. I tipped off the marshals about where to find Hawthorne and Webb. And when Marcus Webb escaped with the boy, I spent years hunting for them." Boone stared at the man he'd called father-in-law, feeling sick to his stomach. "You've been in our home. You've eaten at our table. You watched Dr. Reed save lives, knowing he was the son of a man you murdered." "I never found them," Silas continued, as if he hadn't heard Boone's words. "Marcus Webb hid the boy so well that I gave up searching. I thought they were both dead until tonight." Dr. Reed stood up slowly, his face a mixture of relief and rage. "You destroyed my father's name. You made me believe I was the son of a killer. You let me carry that guilt for 30 years while you lived comfortably on stolen money." "The money was already mine," Silas protested weakly. "It came from my bank. Money that belonged to the depositors," Deputy Kane interrupted as he approached with handcuffs. "Money that ruined families when your bank collapsed. You didn't just rob your own institution, Blackwood. You stole the life savings of everyone who trusted you." Violet Brooks looked at her father with horror and disgust. "How could you let me marry into this family? How could you watch Boone build his life on land you knew was bought with blood money?" "Because I thought the secret was safe," Silas replied, as Deputy Kane snapped the handcuffs around his wrists. "I thought Marcus Webb and the boy were dead. I thought the journal was destroyed. I never expected Malachi to find those documents." Malachi Brooks stepped forward, still holding Marcus Webb's journal. "Sarah Ward kept these papers because she suspected the truth about you, didn't she? She knew who you really were." Silas nodded miserably. "Sarah was Jeremiah Blackwood's sister. She recognized me when I came to this territory, but she agreed to keep the secret to protect Violet. She never knew about the murders until she found Marcus Webb's journal among her mother's things. The pieces of the 30-year puzzle were finally falling into place. Sarah Ward had discovered her brother's crimes, but had died before she could decide what to do with the information. The documents had remained hidden until Malachi found them 3 months ago. Dr. Reed walked over to Silas Ward and looked him directly in the eyes. "My father was a good man who made one mistake trusting you. Marcus Webb saved my life and gave me a chance to help people. They both deserved better than what you gave them." Deputy Kane began leading Silas toward the door, but the arrested man turned back one last time. "The ranch is legitimate now," he said to Boone. "Marcus Webb worked that land honestly. Whatever crimes I committed, the Carter family earned their place here." As Silas Ward was led away in handcuffs, the remaining guests began to understand that justice was finally being served for crimes that had been hidden for 3 decades. 3 months later, the Carter ranch looked exactly the same from the outside, but everything about it had changed. Boone Carter stood on his front porch watching Dr. Samuel Reed, who had officially reclaimed his birth name of Thomas Hawthorne, tend to a sick calf in the corral. The irony wasn't lost on him that the son of the man his family had unknowingly honored was now working their land as a free man. The trial of Jeremiah Blackwood had been swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence from Marcus Webb's journal and federal records that corroborated every detail, the man who had called himself Silas Ward was sentenced to life in prison for multiple murders and bank fraud. The stolen money, what remained of it after 30 years, was returned to the families of the original depositors. Clara Carter emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her wedding night had ended with the arrest of her father-in-law, but in the months that followed, she and Boone had grown closer than ever. The crisis had stripped away all pretense between them, leaving only truth and genuine partnership. "Dr. Hawthorne says the calf will be fine," she reported, handing Boone his coffee. "Just a mild fever that should break by tomorrow." Boone smiled at his wife's easy use of their friend's real name. The community had struggled with the revelation at first, but Dr. Hawthorne's 30 years of dedicated service had earned him forgiveness for a deception he'd maintained to protect others. If anything, learning the truth about his past had made people respect him more. "Violet stopped by while you were in town," Clara continued. "She wanted to thank us again for letting her stay in the guest house until she finds her own place." Boone nodded. Violet Brooks had divorced Malachi within a month of the wedding night revelations. She couldn't forgive him for keeping the truth hidden for 3 months, and he couldn't explain why he'd chosen to reveal it in such a dramatic fashion. The marriage hadn't survived the secrets and the public humiliation. Dr. Hawthorne approached the porch, wiping his hands on a towel. The calf's fever is breaking. Should be back to normal by morning. Any word from the federal investigators? Boone asked. They officially closed the case yesterday, Dr. Hawthorne replied. All charges against William Hawthorne and Marcus Webb have been posthumously dropped. The government is even considering a formal apology for the wrongful pursuit and killing of my father. The vindication had meant everything to Dr. Hawthorne. For 30 years, he'd carried the burden of believing his father was a murderer. Learning the truth had lifted a weight from his shoulders that had shaped every decision of his adult life. There's something else, Dr. Hawthorne continued. The territorial governor wants to rename Silver Creek. They're calling it Hawthorne Creek now, in honor of my father and Marcus Webb. Boone extended his hand to his friend. Your father would be proud of the man you became, Thomas. Marcus Webb, too. As the three of them stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, they represented something powerful. A family built not on blood or shared names, but on truth, forgiveness, and the decision to honor the good that came from tragedy. The Carter Ranch would continue to thrive, but now it carried the legacy of 4 men, William Hawthorne, Marcus Webb, Silas Ward, and Boone Carter, whose stories had finally been told completely and honestly. The wedding night that had begun with celebration and ended with confession had ultimately brought justice to the living and peace to the dead. And in a territory where names and reputations meant everything, the truth had proven more valuable than any lie, no matter how carefully protected. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where secrets and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.